Hundreds of thousands of years ago, a war was fought. A war so brutal that an entire people chose to be immortal rather than extinction. That choice allowed them to survive, but immortality would prove to be a curse that haunted them forever. I am of course talking about the Tellann Imass, the Silent Host. Today we're going to explore who they are, where they came from, and their tragic tale. First off, who were the Tellann Imass before they chose immortality? The Tellann Imass were not always immortal. Once they were simply known as the Imass. They were described as an imposing people, short in stature but powerfully built, with broad shoulders and disproportionately long arms. Their skin was smooth and almost hairless, the color of gold or honey, and their legs were short and bowed, giving them a low, grounded presence. Though their body was generally hairless, they did grow thick beards around the jawline and mouth, as well as thick black hair on their heads. One small note would be, it is easy to draw comparisons to the Tellann Imass and Tolkien's dwarves, with many of the physical traits lined up, and like dwarves, the Imass carry a deeply tragic history, whether intentionally or not. I think the resemblance is worth stating. Now, back to the Imass. They were one of the founding races of Wu, and a distant precursor to humanity. To my knowledge, these are the founding races. They are as followed: the Jaghut, the Toblakai, the Imass, and the Forkrolasale and Kachane Chamail. The Imass primarily lived in high tents and caves, forming tribal societies that were surprisingly advanced for their time. They dressed in fur and hide, resembling what we might imagine as a primitive caveman, but appearances are misleading, as the Imass had access to magic via the Warren of Tellann, as well as being skilled craftsmen capable of shaping stone weapons sharp enough to cut through even the thickest of armor. The Imass worshipped the spirits they believed existed in all things: earth and rock, tree and beast, sun and stars, antler, bone, and blood. They were deeply in tune with the world around them and saw life itself as a blessing. Each night they raised their voices in song to mark the return of darkness, not with fear, but with understanding. For the Imass, darkness was not an enemy. It was a reminder that death awaits at the end of life's path, and that meaning is found in the journey between. Community and togetherness was central to the Imass's life. To seek solitude from one's kin was nearly a crime because the group was everything, and separation weakened it. That bond ran so deep because the Imass could not hide their emotions. They possessed none of the masks or disguises common to other races. Grief, love, friendship, and loyalty touched them more deeply, and once formed, these bonds were unbreakable. So how did a people who valued life and unity above all else become so cold, heartless husks, driven by rage? To answer that, we turn to the next chapter of the Imass story. The Jaghut Wars. A handful of Jaghut tyrants would come to dominate the Imass, not through open conquest, but through deception. Presenting themselves as gods, they enslaved entire clans, forcing them to do unspeakable acts and reducing them to little more than tools. Despite being advanced for their time, the Imass were a naive people. They were reclusive, rarely interacting with the wider world, choosing instead to hide and observe others from a safe distance. That isolation made them vulnerable, and for the powerful Jaghut tyrants it was an opportunity they were more than willing to exploit. It took generations, but eventually the Imass came to understand the truth, that they had been deceived. The tyrants were not gods, and the cruelty inflicted upon them was not right. With aid from the Jaghuts, who were not tyrants, the Imass rose in rebellion. What followed was not a single war, but many bloody, desperate conflicts fought against enemies far stronger than the Imass. The Imass were brave, but they were outmatched. The Jaghut tyrants wielded immense magic using the warren of Felek, a warren of ice, to raise vast fields of ice that surrounded entire clans, cutting them off from one another. Trapped and isolated, the Imass began to starve. As extinction loomed, a decision had to be made. Across the world of Wu, scattered and separated by walls of ice, the Imass held councils wherever they could, and at these councils, known as the First Gathering, they performed one last desperate act, the Ritual of Tellann. The diaspora refers to the time abruptly after the Ritual of Tellann had been performed, and it lasted for about 300,000 years. The ritual transformed most of the Imass into the Tellann Imass. It bound them to the warren of Tellann and gave them immortality. But it also changed how they looked. It is unclear whether this change happened right away or over 100 years. Either way, they came to resemble walking corpses. Dry, leathery flesh clung to their bones, and where it had fallen away, bare skulls were left in frozen, toothy grins. Their eyes were dark and hollow, yet still showed awareness. Their clothes they wore were torn and rotting, mirroring the decaying of their bodies. With these physical changes, they also gained powers that made them one of the most powerful fighting forces in the world of Wu. They gained great strength, nearly indestructible bones, and the power to disappear into the dust so as to travel at great speeds. These are just a couple of the powers they gained. And with these newfound powers, they fought with renewed force against the Jaghut, and the Jaghut wars were rekindled. And it is said that it dragged on for nearly 300,000 years. Though it dragged on for that long, it was not through many decisive victories, but more slow, relentless attrition. The Imass would slowly grind down the Jaghut. In an effort to survive, the Jaghuts raised vast ice fields across the world, sealing themselves away in isolation. This was the opposite of what they had done before, as before they had cruelly sealed off the Imass as to starve them, but now they sealed themselves away in fear. But even this could not stop the Tellann Imass. Their hatred was tireless, as well as their discipline to their goal. It was unstoppable, and they would slowly break through the ice. What followed was not just, it was genocide. The Tellann Imass made no distinction between the evil Jaghut tyrants and Jaghut children, women, and the elderly. All must die. Their methods were often deliberately cruel. Some Jaghuts were placed beneath massive stones left to die slowly. In pursuit of justice, the Tellann Imass destroyed the tyranny that the Jaghut had imposed on them. But in doing so, they found the evil within themselves. When finally the Jaghut war had ended, the Imass still lived on. They wandered the world seeking to find meaning, but found none. They would often be used by powerful gods who were smart and knew how to harness them. The Tellann Imass were a very different people post-ritual. Once quiet and together, they turned arrogant and viewed failure as the gravest sin. Any warrior who faltered or became a burden was abandoned to fend for themselves. Escaping the ritual was possible, but only via water, where the Tellann Imass would dissolve and finally find peace. Few chose this path, though. Usually those so badly damaged or destroyed that they could no longer move. Those few would seek an end to their existence. And so, the Tellann Imass live on, eternal, restless and hopeless, nothing like their former selves, bound by a ritual, yet they had to live, as witnesses to a world ever-changing, carrying the weight of endless years and the past atrocities they had committed.